Hi and welcome to the channel, and this time we're getting stuck into the bit I think everyone's been waiting for: what's wrong with the engine on this IS250. Now, as a quick recap, this is a salvage IS250 I got out of an auction for about £900 with engine issues, cosmetic damage, suspension damage. You've seen the last couple of videos, I've done the initial bit of engine diagnosis. We've started fixing some of the suspension, brake and getting the alloys refurbed issues. Now though, I'm getting stuck into the engine, and to recap again, we know there's a compression issue with one of the cylinders on the left bank, and I know that there's a timing fault coming up on the dash, which I'm still starting to try and get stuck into. So now, go straight back in and let's look at what's actually up with this engine and what I can do about it.
So we pick up where we left off, post-compression check, and just to recap, we know there's a problem with number 4 cylinder, and there's also still that P0018 code to track down, something to do with the cam on this side's timing not working with the crank. So the next thing I did was get the valve covers off after removing the intake and all the rest of it, and have a look at the timing. So they're ready to come off now. They were on just to protect them from the weather. So if I now remove this cam cover, which should be good to go. There we go. Ignore the mess, that will become irrelevant. But if you look at the cam timing marks, and it's currently set at top dead centre, those are all in line. So the cams are not actually out of time as far as I can tell on this side, which is interesting. So now that I knew the timing was okay on the left hand side, I decided to get the right hand side off and have a look at that as well, which meant I had to take the fuel pump off and all sorts of things off from that side, which is a bit of a pain. But again, once that was done, it was, there we go, bolts going everywhere. It was just a case of lifting this off. And when looking at this side, once again, aligned and aligned. So aligned, 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 and then you can't see it, but also aligned. So there's no cam timing issues, or chain timing issues. And that then leads to the question, well, what is it? Dirty oil is one potential cause, but I didn't feel that lucky. Possibly it is the VVT solenoid, but never mind, because what I then did, after having a quick look down the intake ports into where the intake valves were, and I'll show you some pictures now because that was particularly disgusting, so there's a definite need to do a decarbon on those. But for reasons I'll come into, that is now completely pointless, because what I then ended up doing was getting an endoscope to have a look at the cylinder bores, and when I finally got one arrive, even though I wanted one with the side camera, I eventually got one without, thanks China, but managed to get some shots of the cylinder walls anyway, and what I found was this. So as you can see there, vertical lines on cylinder bores are generally not good news, and that was the story across several of the other bores as well, so it wasn't just one cylinder. So that is basically scoring on the cylinder walls in the bores, and at that point there is nothing you can do with these engines, because the cylinder walls are very thin. You can't really machine them out or bore them particularly, because they don't have enough meat on them to do that. So really at this point I am not going any further with this engine. The bores are scored, there's still an unknown timing issue, and to be honest, with especially the head gasket issue that I suspect at cylinder number 4, although I didn't do a leak down test to confirm where and what that was, because I'd found the scored bores by then, so it was pointless. But when you start putting it all together, the cost and the time and the effort to basically strip this engine down quite significantly to try and work out what was wrong and fix it. It just wasn't becoming worthwhile. So a new engine has been sourced, and what I need to do now is get as much of this stuff stripped off as possible, because I can't do an engine out on a car park, in a car park. So I'm going to have to get it into a garage to do that. Luckily there's a Toyota specialist near me that are going to do it, and it's basically a case of take this engine out, put another one in, pretty much in this state, obviously with the valve covers on, thank goodness, and I just rebuild it from there. So what I'm going to do is try and make it as easy as possible, and therefore we're going to be draining the oil from the engine for obvious reasons. At the same time I'll be draining the coolant and removing the radiator and the condenser. Luckily the aircon system is completely dry, so I can get that out without having to degas it, although I will need to investigate why it was empty in the first place, so I'll probably need to replace all the seals on that while the engine's out. At the same time I'll also get all the ancillaries off of this engine, so the alternator, power steering pump, and any other bits and pieces that aren't immediately necessary and that need to be transferred over to the new engine. So a little bit of a direction change, but this was something I'd planned for, albeit as a contingency, but it looks like that is now going to be what's happening. So I'm now going to get on with draining the fluids and then stripping down the front end of the engine. Oh joy. Well, that's been a productive half hour or so. The coolant's drained. The aircon condenser was separated from the radiator. The radiator and the condenser are both out. And I've got a lot more engine bay that I can now start cleaning once all this is clear. Next it's going to be removing the I think it's the igniter box or something like that. I can't remember what it's called again. And all the ancillaries on this side as much as I can get to. And then that's the engine pretty much good to come out, as much as I want it to be anyway. The good news is the radiator itself is in really good condition and actually looks pretty recently replaced. It's certainly not very damaged. The coolant, the aircon rad on the other hand, not sure if it's coming across particularly well, but it's not in good condition. I'll be interested to see if that's possibly why there was no gas in the aircon system, was the fact that this thing was leaking. We shall see. It's not a massive drama to get it out again if I need to. What I've also done is taken off the guard on the underneath of the engine, because that can be cleaned up and painted. The transmission cover's off, and basically I've just been doing a load of stuff to make it a lot easier to get this engine out. Oh, and I found a missing nut that I dropped a while back, which is always useful. So, next stage is getting all this lot off. So, it is another night, in fact it's another week, because my time available is not massive. And as you can see, we now have the alternator off, the aircon compressor is off, all the different pipes are now blocked up, the engine oil is drained, and it was absolutely foul. I've seen cleaner oil come out of a diesel engine, but that's not a surprise. The one thing I've not done is the starter motor, because it's buried deep in the back there and it's a pain in the neck to get to. To be honest, that's probably simpler done when the engine's out. So that's the one thing I've left, but everything else, as you can see, is looking rather bare. But anyway, more to the point, that honking lump of aluminium is now just about ready to come out, and in 2 days' time it'll be going to a garage where they'll be getting it out and sticking a brand new to this car engine in with only 29,000 miles on it, and I'll be basically taking it back in this condition and building it back up from pretty much what you see there, bar the valve covers. They'll obviously be fitted, but I'll be keeping this engine as a set of spares and probably dismantling it just for giggles later on. But until then, I'm taking the opportunity of a nicely empty but very filthy engine bay to start tackling these little bits of rust you can see creeping in here, and then on the edges where the cross member goes, and then also a little bit down on the lower cross member where the radiator sits. There's also a few other little bits up around the shock towers as well. And then finally, although it might be difficult to see, but there's another one You probably can't, but there's the base of where the battery tray goes, there's a load of rust in there. At the same time, I just picked up an order from Lexus of a lot of replacement bolts, because as you can see, a lot of these are very rusty. So I'm replacing them as I go, just identifying the dodgy ones and getting them replaced. What I'm now going to start doing is wire brushing and just cleaning up the existing rust here. Then it will be a case of wiping it down, applying Cure Rust or a rust converter. I'll leave that for a day, and then I'll come back tomorrow, paint it, so all those areas are going to be done, and then that is it, ready to go. I'm not going to do anything more to it until it comes back with a good used engine fitted. And the first thing I need to do is give everything a good vacuum. So I've got a little 12-volt vacuum cleaner, and just try and get the worst of the muck and the rubbish away from this before we start derusting. Okay, so that's that done. Like I said, there's a lot of muck and rubbish in this engine bay. We'll be getting a proper clean later, but just now that's got the major stuff out. Now I'm just going to get attacking it with a wire brush, preferably mounted to a drill, and start getting all the metal cleaned up. All the areas of rust have now been wire brushed, and actually a lot of it was just kind of rust discoloration. The actual metal is broadly good. You can see some little patches there that are coming up through. Can't really get into there, I'll get some photos later. But basically they've all come up decent, and you can see kind of what it might look like clean versus what it looks like dirty. As I said, I'll deal with that later. But the key point is I'm now ready to start applying anti-rust. I'm going to leave that to sit overnight and cure and go off properly, and then I'm just going to come back and give a quick spray of body colour black. What I've also done is give all the loom connectors that I can reach anyway a bit of a spray off with brake clean, just to get the oil off of them, because they were absolutely filthy. Couldn't get to all of them, but it just makes things a little bit less mucky when I'm putting stuff back together. I don't really want oil getting into the connectors. So next, anti-rust treatment. And a few quick splashes with a paintbrush later. And all of those areas are treated. Instead of let them cure overnight, and just come back and give a quick squiff of paint over them. So next, is getting a way to get all of that out, and a decent one put in. It's been collected today. And the paint work I did, although I don't think you can see it particularly well, but that's come out nice. The rust has been treated and sorted. There's a few other rusty areas that I'll tackle in due course, more on the shock towers and back, but ultimately I wanted to just get at the areas that I needed to strip things out to get at, and all the rest of this can be done as and when. Things like rusty bolts on the ECU and the other sort of fuse boxes and so on, and just generally surface rust everywhere. So that'll get done later, but for now, as I said, the most important thing is getting that hunk of junk out and getting a working engine put in. So more to follow on that.
So as you can tell, that wasn't the best news for the engine, but not a great surprise. I did have suspicions about it, and there was always a bit of a cost sort of benefit balance of, is it going to be worth actually fixing it, considering the mileage of it? 183,000, it's not exactly low mileage. And the amount of time and effort and money I'd have to spend on fixing that engine versus the cost of a good used engine and then paying someone else to fit it. Yes, okay, the second option's more, but I'm getting back a better value car ultimately at the end of it. And as you can see, that's the option I went for. I just was not confident that that engine was a good candidate. So a good used low mileage one is on the way, and I'm now going to get stuck in the next episode to doing some of the work, further work around the rest of the car while I'm waiting for that engine and the booking to happen, and then getting stuck into actually building the engine back up after it's been fitted. So hopefully you'll stay with me for that, and if you liked what you've seen so far, then please consider liking down below. Comments are welcome, and consider subscribing as well, always appreciated. But hopefully you'll be with me for the next video. Thank you.